what we saw last week here in Michigan with the plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer, I think, is everyone's worst nightmare when they think of extremist reactions to political figures or political discourse. But talk about the connection between that kind of behavior and the language that we see unfolding pretty frequently now in political discourse.
I wrote an opinion piece in the Detroit News that talked about three key factors that I think are fueling this broader phenomena that's happening throughout the country, and the Watchmen plot is just a manifestation of that. The three key factors that I talked about were the impact of the pandemics, the protests, and the aftermath of the George Floyd death and Breonna Taylor, and then thirdly, the whole state of political discourse in the country. And when it comes to the political discourse part of it, yeah, this is really tough to sort of empirically prove, but there are researchers who think that according to their analysis, that there is a little bit more of a direct correlation between very hard-edged political rhetoric and language and how that motivates individuals towards violent extremism.
The First Amendment provides a pretty effective shield for these folks to foment their the growth of extremism.
Yeah, this is one of the big challenges for the United States, tackling this issue of domestic terrorism. We have very strong constitutional protections on what is considered free speech, to include the most extreme and radical ideas, at least to all of us here on this screen, but to the individuals who share those beliefs, as long as they don't try to take criminal action, they're perfectly legitimate. So over the course of the last several years, we've seen more and more of that kind of sort of propaganda and discourse and beliefs, both on the international terrorism side and the domestic terrorism side, sort of percolating in social media and in other kind of closed environments. Now, there are other countries overseas that have very different laws with respect to hate speech, and you can get prosecuted for terrorism-related charges for doing things that in this country are completely legal.
We also have freedom of association in this country, and we saw footage of, for instance, the Senate Majority Leader on stage earlier with some of the people who were involved in this plot. When some of these folks were out at the Capitol marching around with guns. Talk about the connection between political leadership and the cover it might be giving in some cases to this kind of reaction.
Yeah, that's another sort of issue that we have to sort of unpack here inside the United States, with that freedom of association combined with the freedom of speech and the right to bear arms in public spaces. These are all things that make it very difficult for law enforcement to know when to intervene. It seemed fairly disturbing to see these, not the protest aspect of it, but the fact that there were so many people showing up armed to these events. And then some of those people who were armed actually got access into the state capitol. You can't bring firearms into most federal buildings, even if you're a sworn law enforcement officer. And if you are going to do that, you have to go through a whole series of checks. So there seemed to be something very different happening here in Michigan or with the state capitol that allowed that to happen then. And again, the perceptions it created about whether that's legitimate or not, and then perhaps the sort of the fear that created as well.
So Javed, how do we get ahead of this, and how do we counter this without trampling rights?
We don't have the right policy framework or paradigm to confront what I believe is now a growing threat of domestic terrorism. And I think there's a lot of things we could be doing on that front, whether from the legal side, the federal level, the state and local level, things that could be happening with the private sector, and then even local communities. This is the 25th anniversary of the Oklahoma City attack, which prior to 9/11 was the single biggest act of terrorism in the United States. We shouldn't wait for another Oklahoma City type event. We should start doing the groundwork now. And I'm just not sure what it's going to take to bring people together to have those conversations. Hopefully it's not a tragedy.